Hello and welcome. My name is Vikram Chandra and you're watching This World, a show that wraps weekly developments from around the world and keeps you on top of the biggest global stories. This week's biggest headline is from Ukraine, where the spectre of a nuclear tragedy has resurfaced once again, courtesy of Vladimir Putin. He's issued a clear yet unambiguous ultimatum. He says Russia could use depleted uranium weapons on the battlefield. The question is why? The answer depends on who you ask. The West says that Putin wants to avenge the death of one of his best generals. The Kremlin says it's because NATO is supplying Ukraine with the very same weapons. Who's speaking the truth? Well, the jury is open, but this much is clear. The risks of a nuclear tragedy are increasing every passing day. More about this coming up in less than a minute. But also on the show, how the European Union is pushing to break the monopoly of big tech. It has asked Google to sell off parts of its digital advertising business. It's also introduced new regulations around AI. What are these new rules and why is the EU imposing them? We'll also be discussing Harvard Medical School morgue manager being charged for selling body parts. The man has pulled apart bodies donated for research work. Would you believe it? And then he sold those parts. Whom did he sell the organs to? And who else is involved in this controversy? We will be diving into all those details. But our cover story tonight is about the ultimate danger, the Ukraine war going nuclear. This is not an idle threat, nor is it bravado by a maverick commander. This threat comes straight from Vladimir Putin. On Tuesday, he issued a clear and unambiguous ultimatum that Russia would use depleted uranium weapons on the battlefield. Now why? Why would Putin do this? If you ask the NATO and the West, they will tell you that Putin wants to avenge the death of one of his best generals, Sergei Goryashev, the chief of staff of the 35th Combined Arms Army. He was reportedly killed by a Ukrainian missile strike during Kiev's counteroffensive in Zaporizhia. Now his death is a major blow to the Kremlin. The West says that Putin will not allow this wound to Russia's military ego go unanswered, and the Russian army could use weapons with depleted uranium in Ukraine. Now this marks a big turning point in the war, one that could make it far more dangerous. You see, depleted uranium is a dense byproduct of enriched uranium. It is less explosive and less dangerous, but it retains some radioactive properties. If it's ingested or inhaled, it could be a serious health hazard. If put into bullets and explosives, it can be used to penetrate armored vehicles. In any case, Western media reports say that this threat to use depleted uranium stems from the killing of the Russian general. Now, Moscow doesn't agree. Moscow says it's only returning the favor. You see, Ukraine too could get depleted uranium weapons soon. Look at these reports. The UK is planning to supply depleted uranium shells to Ukraine's armed forces. The US too is set to approve depleted uranium tank rounds for Ukraine. So clearly, Putin has more than one reason to be the first to use these weapons. Similarly, there are more than one reason why the risk of a nuclear tragedy is increasing. Here's reason number 2. The situation at the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in Ukraine is getting serious. Says who? Rafael Grossi, the nuclear chief at the United Nations. On Thursday, he visited the Moscow-occupied nuclear plant to assess the threat it faces after the destruction of the Kakhovka dam, which we spoke about last week. His assessment is this. 1. The plant faces a relatively dangerous situation due to the nearby flooding. 2. There could be a major accident at the facility if the dam, which formed a reservoir for the plant, is not fixed. In other words, the plant may be safer now, but the situation remains fragile. And reason number 3, and perhaps the most serious of the lot, is this entire talk about Russian nuclear weapons now being placed into Belarus and what could possibly happen with them. Look, nuclear threats, the moving around of nuclear weapons, this is dangerous. This is a scary escalation at the best of times. And when it's happening in the middle of an all-out shooting war, it makes the situation even more dangerous and even more fragile. And frankly, what's making this entire situation even more fragile is Ukraine's ongoing counter-offensive. It's picking pace every minute. This week, Ukraine says it liberated 4 villages in the country's southeast. This was the first yet modest victory in its counter-offensive. So which villages does Ukraine say it has liberated? Well, there's Blahodatne, there's Neskuchne, there's Makaruvka, and there's Storozheve. They are all located in the Donetsk region. Here's a map of the entire region. That's what Ukraine says it has made some gains. Now, what does Russia have to say about this? Well, quite interestingly, nothing at all. Moscow is yet to confirm the fall of any of these villages. Instead, it's speaking of repelling Ukraine assaults in the region. Look at this report. Moscow claims that it has repelled Ukrainian counteroffensives in the Donetsk and the Zaporizhia regions. How? By hitting targets with sea-launched high-precision missile strikes. Interestingly, Russia has also claimed its first kill by artificial intelligence. Reports say that its highly acclaimed S-350 Vityaz air defense system recently shot down a Ukrainian aircraft while operating in auto mode. Now, this would be an unprecedented and an extraordinary feat. An air defense system destroying an aircraft without any operator intervention. This would mark the first instance where a system operated completely automatically used artificial intelligence for combat. In another first, Putin has hit oligarchs with a $5.3 billion war tax. The proposed levy was outlined in a bill introduced on Tuesday, and under this bill, Russian businesses making profits of more than 1 billion rubles a year will have to pay a one-off tax up to 10% of their total gains. On the face of it, this move may seem arbitrary, but Russian media reports claim that the oligarchs themselves came up with the idea. Now, why did they do this? Because they realized they made gigantic profits during the course of this war, so it's a win-win deal for both sides. What do all of these developments tell you? That as Ukraine's counteroffensive gains strength, if it gains strength, so does Vladimir Putin's determination to counter this. Now, he's taking control of mercenary groups, he's planning to use depleted uranium weapons, he's increasing the budget for this war, and he's unleashing AI to down aircraft. In a nutshell, he's going all out to ensure that Kiev's advances fail. The question is, will he succeed? Well, so far, he has been succeeding in at least maintaining the standoff and the stalemate, and he might continue to do that going forward. For more on how all of this is actually going, let's now talk to Charles Kupchan, who's the Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs on the staff at the National Security Council in the Barack Obama administration. Thank you so much for joining us. Just wanted to get your sense of what's actually happening in Ukraine, especially with that counter-offensive. Many reports coming out on whether it's been successful or not and how successful it's been. What are you being able to pick up?
Well, I think it's way too early to make any judgments about how the offensive will go. This is an offensive operation that will likely run for months, maybe years. It's very difficult to say. But it's clear that in the various locations that the Ukrainians have tried to punch through Russian defenses, they have not yet made a great deal of progress. They are running into minefields. They are running into Russian defenses that are multiple layers, trenches, tank traps, more trenches, all kinds of concrete fortifications. And one problem that an advancing army faces, and the Ukrainians are facing this, is the offensive requires them to come out from their own defensive positions. It's easier to hit them when they're out in the open, when they're massing for an armored breakthrough. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've begun to see fairly substantial Ukrainian casualties.
We're just trying to look at the possible black swan events that could come into this and make a change one way or the other. We've been hearing all that discussion about what could happen on the nuclear front with depleted uranium or, Belarus and what's happening out of there, possible escalation. We've also been hearing possibly about what's happening with the Wagner group, with Prigozhin, with his relationship with the Russian leadership. What do you think could happen to make a dramatic change one way or the other?
I haven't yet seen any sign that Putin is in trouble, that is to say, could face a real domestic threat to his regime. Public support for the war continues to run high. As far as we know, the security apparatus, the key decision makers around Putin are standing by him, in part because he successfully built a patronage system. Their livelihood, their power, their influence all stems from Vladimir Putin, and that makes it hard for them to go anywhere. So that I would say that the real black swans in my mind are China. Is China going to start arming Russia, which in my mind is a real possibility if Russia begins to lose and if Ukraine looks like it is posing a real prospect of taking back all of its territory. Escalation is also out there. There's talk the last few days about Putin moving nuclear weapons to Belarus. That hasn't been confirmed, but who knows where this war could go. We've seen dangerous moments. We've seen missiles land in Poland. We've seen Russian fighters force down a U.S. drone. We've seen drones attack the Kremlin. This is a war that has the potential for escalation.
All right, Mr. Kripchen, thank you so much for joining us with that. Thank you. Moving to our next story, EU regulators are pushing to break the monopoly of big technology. They've apparently asked Google to sell off some of its digital advertising business. By doing this, EU has targeted one of Google's most important revenue drivers. This is a part of its sweeping antitrust complaint against the search giant. So what is the EU furious about? It says that Google is abusing its dominant position in online ad sales. It says it favors its tech services to the point that it affects its competitors. Let me just break this down for you. Google's flagship service is its search engine, but its main source of revenue is online advertising. Number one, it sells advertising space on its own website and apps. And number two, it mediates between the advertisers who want to place their ads online and publishers who provide this space. So that's the two things that Google does. Now, these advertisers and publishers rely on ad tech industry tools for putting out their ads, basically the tools that Google provides. The EU says that Google has been misusing these tools for its own advantage. It says that Google is present at all the levels of the ad tech supply chain. The search giant provides technology that enables data collection, ad buying, and publishing as well. Simply put, it has a monopoly in digital advertising. And not only does this harm Google's competitors, but also publishers' interests. It also increases the cost for advertisers. That's why EU has asked Google to sell parts of its advertising business. Google has strongly reacted to the EU's decision. The Vice President of Global ADS, Dan Taylor, said the complaints aren't new and that they only relate to a narrow part of Google's advertising business. The EU case, of course, further adds to Google's regulatory headaches. The company is already battling multiple antitrust cases around the globe. Its vast empire of online ads, search and app stores has been in the crosshairs of regulators for a while now. But the EU, interestingly, is not just calling out Google. It's also trying to regulate artificial intelligence. It has also adopted a landmark AI Act. This act aims to ban systems that pose unacceptable risks to society. It puts in place greater privacy standards, stricter transparency laws, and steeper fines for failing to cooperate. This comes weeks after OpenAI CEO Sam Altman asked for global regulation of artificial intelligence. And in another indication that it's not just Google that is in the crosshairs, in April this year, EU set a deadline for 19 tech giants to comply with its new set of regulations on content. This included Google, but also Meta, Twitter, Amazon, Bing, and TikTok. The rules known as the Digital Services Act, or the DSA, came into force late last year. They require tech firms to reduce harm online, to introduce protections for user rights, and to impose new transparency and accountability requirements on digital platforms. The firms have until August the 25th to put these rules into effect. So, lots of regulation coming and lots of regulation at the EU end. And for more on that, we're now being joined by Luciano Faridi, who's the founding director of the Yale Center for Digital Ethics. He's also professor of cognitive science at Yale University. Professor Faridi, thank you so much for joining us. These steps that we are now starting to hear about, regulate big tech monopolies, do something to break them up. We've been speaking about this for a long time. Do you think it's now moving, it's now actually getting some teeth and moving forward?
I think so. I think you're right. The time has come for some bills, some local legislations, global agreements to become actual law and start becoming something that companies will have to comply with. The typical, perhaps more visible example is the European legislation, but there are literally tens and tens of bills and laws all over the place, from state-based regulation in the United States, imagine California, Illinois, all the way to enormous, gigantic presence, imagine India, Brazil, Australia, who are moving towards a firm legislation.
So there are two different types of regulations that will probably be coming, right? One is tech monopolies and the economic power that they wield. That is one set of regulations. And the other is new technologies are coming which can be misused, like AI and others, and those need to be regulated. So two different types of technologies that we're going to be, two different types of regulations that we're going to be seeing a lot of.
Well, that's the danger of a fragmented approach to regulation. I think we will see some extra time internationally spent on making sure that that fragmentation that you mentioned doesn't happen, and especially that companies all over the world have a clear indication, a clear signal of what is right and wrong. Let me add one point from a sort of industry-related perspective. Companies may not like regulation, but they dislike more uncertainty or fragmentation. Imagine an international company that has to do X and Y and Z, depending on whether it's in this country, in that country, in the European Union, in India, in China, in the United States. Well, clearly that is a scenario that the company does not want to see. So I think that the companies in the long run will welcome international regulations more than fragmented and ad hoc, specific rules that will make their life much more difficult.
All right, so well, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. As I said, early stages, I guess there's a lot that's going to be happening in the years ahead. Thank you for being with us. Now, a really, really horrible crime. Think of an employee stealing parts of a human body and then selling it. Think of that employee working in one of the most respected institutions on the planet. This is not fiction. We are talking about a real incident. We are telling you about the acts of a morgue manager at the Harvard Medical School. Reports say that the man was stealing, selling, and shipping human body parts. These were body parts meant for research work, donated by people for research work. How could somebody possibly sell those body parts? How could the man get away with such a stunt? Let's get into the details now. The man in question is 55-year-old Cedric Lodge. The former morgue manager used to deal with human remains. These are body parts donated to the school for educational purposes, for research. But Lodge has been charged with conspiracy and transport of stolen goods. So what happened? What did the man do with the bodies? Well, he was caught stealing parts of the donated cadavers. The body parts included heads, brains, bones, and even the skin. Lodge transported these parts to his residence in New Hampshire. Reports say that he conspired with his wife to sell these body parts. Authorities have found two buyers, Katrina McLean and Joshua Taylor. both of whom have been charged under illicit trade. Reports say that McLean sold the stolen parts in her shop. She's accused of selling the parts in multiple states. McLean even sold human skin to a man in Pennsylvania who, believe it or not, later used it to create leather. McLean was charged with transporting stolen goods within and outside state lines. Although the maximum sentence can be up to 10 years, she was let go since it's a non-violent offense. Reports say she will soon be called to court in Pennsylvania. Now let's remind you, Cedric Lodge is not new to this horrendous trade. Authorities say he was selling body parts since 2018, sometimes through the US Postal Service. Now this may sound unbelievable, but Lodge brought his buyers inside the school to choose the remains. He displayed body parts and let buyers select what they liked. How much did Lodge earn from this absolutely ghastly trade? But for starters, one buyer paid $37,000 for the cadaver parts. In 2020, Lodge was paid $200 for selling human brains. In 2019, prosecutors say that Lodge received $1,000 and the memo said head number 7. So what are the reactions to this incident? The police is left horror-struck and says that some crimes defy understanding. And you can say that again. Prosecutors say that 3 other people also face charges in separate indictments. Who are the other 3 people? Well, there's 52-year-old Matthew Lampe, 41-year-old Jeremy Pauley, and Candace Chapman Scott. Although Candace is not directly connected to the Harvard morgue case, she's been accused of stealing and selling body parts. The Harvard Medical School has called this incident an abhorrent betrayal. University officials have apologized to the donors of those body parts, the anatomical donors, and their families. It's clearly a massive, massive betrayal. Can you imagine people who have donated the organs or donated the cadavers of their loved ones in an effort to advance science, in an effort to do something good for humanity, and then they find that those body parts have been trafficked, have been sold to somebody else for money? Look, organ trafficking is now a worldwide phenomenon. Studies show that the illicit trade is part of a $1.7 billion industry. The trafficking often happens in countries with fewer regulations. How do people like Lodge, though, get away with it in America and one of the top institutions in the world? Perhaps through ties with corrupt medical professionals, lab staff, drivers, and potentially law enforcement as well. Now, frankly, an incident like this could have massive repercussions. If somebody at a place like the Harvard Medical School do something like this, will organ donors ever be able to trust medical schools again? What is Harvard Medical School going to do after this? How will it react with this? How will it assure donors that nothing like this can happen again and nobody else is there who is in any way connected to this? A lot more is going to happen in this particular story as we roll forward, and we will keep an eye out for further developments. But that's all we have for you on This World this week. Do join us again next week as we bring you the biggest stories from around the world, all the latest headlines and some of the big newsmakers. That's it for now. Goodbye.